My name is Bryce Langston, and if there's a phrase that defines my role in the world, it's just enough. Just enough to be reliable. Just enough to be invited. Just enough to be forgotten. At 35, I've perfected the art of existing in the margins. Quiet, consistent, and largely invisible. My job as a regional safety inspector for logistics firms fits that theme perfectly. I come in, audit the systems, fix the broken links, and leave without much more than a nod. No one throws parties for the safety guy. No one remembers the man who prevented disaster instead of causing one. I used to think that was fine. Then I married Kendall Hartley. The Hartleys are the kind of family you see in magazine spreads about legacy and lawn care, country club smiles, group photos with monogrammed sweaters, family crests etched into Christmas cards. I wasn't raised in that world. I came from a working-class family that showed love with hands. Hands that built, lifted, repaired. And I brought that with me. When I married Kendall, I thought showing up, doing the work, and supporting her people was the way in. Maybe not into their hearts, but at least into their respect. For the last 6 years, I've been the invisible scaffolding of Kendall's family gatherings. I repaired their air conditioners in July heat. I fixed their flickering Christmas lights without needing to be asked. I hauled her sister Riley's oversized couch up 2 flights of stairs when her boyfriend flaked. I even quietly floated the cost of a surprise baby shower when Kendall's older sister Cassidy fell short on planning funds. I never mentioned it. I never asked for anything back. I figured decency had its own reward, even if it wasn't wrapped in applause. But there's something haunting about always being helpful and never being seen. I noticed it in the way Riley's laugh changed when I walked into her room. The way Kendall's mom, Eleanor, only called me when she needed something heavy moved or something technical explained. The way her dad, Howard, Mr. Hartley, would say things like, "You're not one of us, Bryce, but you're trying." I always took that as a compliment. Now I realize it wasn't. Then came the night of Mr. Hartley's retirement party. It was held at the Ridgeview Country Club, a place with granite bar tops and soft jazz that made you forget your age. I arrived early to help string lights along the railings and check that the projector was working for the slideshow Kendall's cousin had pieced together. I had even stopped at the wine distributor to pick up 2 extra cases that Kendall forgot to reorder. No one thanked me. Not that I expected it. As the guests trickled in, I watched the way the family worked the room. Riley, in a gold dress, laughing with someone from her law firm. Cassidy showing off baby photos to a cluster of admiring friends. Kendall looked radiant, to be fair. She always knew how to dress for a statement. And me? I stood by the drink table, nodding politely, answering the occasional question about lighting or setup. I delivered a short, heartfelt toast midway through the night. Nothing flashy, just a few lines about Howard had built more than a career. You built a legacy. It got the right amount of claps. Kendall leaned over and said, "That was sweet," before drifting off into another conversation that didn't include me. But what stayed with me, what anchored itself into my spine, was the seating chart. A laminated board by the main entrance, arranged like a wedding banquet, rows of names underneath table numbers. I scanned it twice. My name wasn't there. I stood there for a moment too long, staring like it might magically appear. Then Riley's voice cut through the air behind me. Something about Kendall's charity case. I turned around just in time to see her smirk fade when our eyes met. She didn't even flinch, just kept laughing with her wine glass tilted like royalty. I walked outside for air. The cold nipped at my collar, but it wasn't the weather that made me feel frozen. It was the realization that I didn't have a seat, not just at the table, but in the family. I was a placeholder, a +1 with a credit card, someone they tolerated because it was convenient. All that effort, all those weekends, all that silence I filled with service meant nothing. I didn't yell, didn't storm out. I waited until the night ended. I helped clean up, loaded Kendall's trunk with leftover supplies, and drove home in silence while she scrolled through pictures and laughed at inside jokes I'd never be part of. That night, lying in bed next to the woman I married, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, maybe they don't see you because you were never meant to be seen. But I saw them, all of them, and that was the beginning of everything changing. It was a warm evening, the kind where the sky holds on to daylight just a bit longer, reluctant to let go. We were still at the retirement party, and I was doing what I always did, hovering in the background, helping keep things running without drawing attention to myself. The lights were up, the drinks were flowing in the air, buzz with polite laughter and polished conversation. I just finished giving a brief toast. Nothing elaborate, just a few words to honor Mr. Hartley, who had, for all his faults, built a life his family was proud to inherit. When I sat down, Kendall leaned over and offered a quick that was sweet, before floating away again to mingle with someone from her father's old firm. I stayed near the back patio, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, watching the people I'd spent years trying to win over. For a moment, I felt content. I'd done my part. I'd showed up as always. Then came the conversation about the family barbecue the next day. A tradition, a big one. It was all they could talk about. The menu, the guest list, the setup, the new theme they were trying this year. I waited for the part where Kendall would loop me in, assign me a task, mention our arrival time, ask me to help with chairs like she usually did, but she didn't. Still trying to be useful, I stepped into the conversation and said, "I'll bring the dessert tomorrow. Got that bakery you all liked last Easter? They've got that peach cobbler again." Kendall paused. I remember that pause. It was subtle, but not silent. She looked down at her wine, swirled it like she was thinking, then looked back up with this glint in her eyes. And then she laughed. Not a big belly laugh, just a short, dismissive chuckle like a sound effect used to soften a blow. "Oh, you weren't invited," she said like she was commenting on the weather. I blinked. "What?" She smiled like it was all perfectly reasonable. "It's kind of a close family thing." Riley, who had been scrolling through her phone next to her, snorted and turned the screen toward me. There it was, digital evidence, a full seating chart, programs printed in gold script, a note for the MC, even a slide for the opening prayer. My name wasn't on anything. "It's just easier this way," Kendall said, shrugging. "You know how my mom is." She wanted it clean. She said clean like I was a stain they didn't know how to scrub out. I looked at her for a long moment. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe a flicker of guilt, some embarrassment, even a bit of hesitation. But there was nothing. Just that same easy calm she always wore around her family, like a different version of herself entirely. A curated Kindle, a Hartley Kindle. I smiled. Just a twitch. Just enough to not cause a scene. I didn't argue. I didn't press. I just nodded once, took one final sip from my glass, and placed it down on the tray of empty flutes beside me. I stood up slowly, dusted off the front of my slacks, and walked toward the exit. Nobody followed me. Nobody called out. I could hear the conversation behind me resume without missing a beat. More talk about side dishes, lawn games, who was bringing what, like I'd never been there at all. I got into my car and sat still for a long time. Not angry, not even hurt, just hollow. And that hollow quickly filled with clarity. They'd made a choice. They always had. I just hadn't seen it. I was never one of them. I was a utility, a silent donor of time, money, and labor. I was what you used when you needed help moving boxes or footing a bill. But I was never going to be at their table. Not really. Not the way they talked about each other. Not the way they remembered each other in stories. Not the way they looked at each other and laughed. But the thing they forgot, the thing they all overlooked in their perfect little planning frenzy, was that I was the one who booked the venue. Not Kendall, not her mom, not Howard. Me, Bryce Langston, the invisible man with a bank account and the organizational skills. I pulled out my phone and opened the email confirmation. There it was, the Hartley family barbecue reserved in my name, paid for by my card. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the options menu. I didn't act out of spite. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, something cleaner, a correction. I hit Edit Reservation, scrolled to the bottom, and clicked Cancel. The catering deposit gone. Sound equipment canceled too. Even the bounce house Riley insisted on for her nieces and nephews deleted. I sat there and watched the digital confirmations roll in, each one like a small breath of fresh air. Then I turned off the screen, leaned back in my seat, and let myself laugh. Just once. Just enough. It felt good. I slept like a rock that night. Not out of spite, not because I was proud of what I'd done, but because for the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt something close to peace. Real, full-bodied stillness. No internal monologue reminding me of what I didn't say, what I didn't do, what I should have tolerated, just quiet. I didn't even hear Kendall come in. She slipped into bed hours later, probably thinking I was too embarrassed or too sensitive to speak. But I wasn't either of those things anymore. I was awake. Morning sunlight poured in through the curtains, filtered and soft. The kind that usually inspired lazy weekends and shared breakfasts. But there was no sound of bacon in the pan. No orange juice being poured. Just silence and the scent of strong coffee brewing in the kitchen made by me as always. I sat at the counter with my mug phone beside me, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. At 11:31 a.m., the first message came in. Kendall. Bryce, what did you do? Not good morning. Not, are you okay? Just confusion and blame, neatly wrapped in 6 words. I didn't reply. I just took a sip and refreshed the page. 5 minutes later, the second text rolled in. This time from Eleanor, Kendall's mother, Eleanor Hartley. Bryce, we are at the park and everything is gone. That one made me chuckle. Not because I was cruel, but because it was so surreal, so utterly on brand. No one called. No one thought maybe to check in on me the night before. But the moment their party plans unraveled, I was suddenly relevant again. Suddenly visible. I refreshed my messages again. More were rolling in now. Riley sent 3 a rapid fire. No greetings, no punctuation. Riley, did you seriously cancel the caterers? Riley, you're being childish. Riley, you're ruining everything. I didn't even open them all. I let them pile up one after the other like fallen dominoes. Kendall tried calling once, then again. I let it ring. When the third call came, I put my phone on, Do Not Disturb, and turned on the TV. Some mindless home renovation show. A guy with a nail gun and a too-wide smile talking about open-concept kitchens. I wasn't angry. That was the strangest part. There was no adrenaline, no guilt. I wasn't interested in revenge. What I did was a retraction. I took my name, my money, and my energy off the table. I finally matched their actions with my own. It wasn't even about the barbecue, not really. It was about what it represented. All those years, I stood by them. Hands full of tools, arms sore from lifting furniture, wallet lighter from things they never re-imbued. I wasn't family. I was a resource. A tool they dusted off when it was convenient and shoved back into the drawer when they were done. They just didn't expect the tool to have a switch. At around noon, Kendall finally came home. I heard the door open, the shuffle of her heels across the hardwood, the small gasp when she saw me calmly sipping coffee in the kitchen, like nothing had happened. She didn't start with a question. She started with accusation. "You humiliated us," she snapped, tossing her purse onto the couch with more force than necessary. I didn't look up from my cup. I wasn't invited. She let out a sharp breath like I was being unreasonable. That's not how family handles things. "Good thing I'm not family then," I said quietly, but clearly. That stopped her. She stood there blinking as if I had spoken a language she didn't understand. She walked to the kitchen island, leaned both hands on the edge, and stared at me. "You made a scene." "No," I replied. "I removed myself from yours." Her mouth opened, then closed like she wanted to fight, but couldn't find the words. Like she wanted to twist it back into my fault, but didn't know where to start. I stood up, rinsed my mug in the sink, and wiped it dry with the towel she always left crumpled on the counter. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. I was calm in a way that made her nervous. She tried again. "Do you have any idea how that made us look? You mean the people who excluded their son-in-law from a family event and used his money to do it?" I tilted my head slightly. "Yeah, I think I have a pretty good idea." Her voice got lower then, more controlled. "You made your point." I turned to face her fully. "No, I made my boundary." That was the moment it clicked. I saw it in her eyes. The realization that something in me had shifted. That the version of Bryce who used to swallow everything and smile through it was gone. And in his place was someone she didn't know how to handle. Later that day, when I checked my phone again, the tone had shifted. A few of the messages stopped being angry and started being confused. Some were attempts to backtrack. Riley sent a passive-aggressive. Could have just talked to us. Eleanor left a dramatic voice memo about how she was deeply disappointed in my lack of maturity. I didn't respond, not one word. Instead, I screenshotted the payment receipt, the one with my name, date, and confirmation number, and sent it to the family group chat. Just that. No caption, no snark. And then I muted the thread. I went back to the couch, turned the volume down low, let the fake smile on the TV host blend into the background as I leaned my head back and listened to the sound of peace. Kendall came home like a storm that forgot it was forecasted. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the hallway mirror. I didn't flinch. I was sitting at the dining table, scrolling idly through a parts catalog for work, half listening to some slow jazz playing on my phone. She kicked off her heels loudly, deliberately, and stood in the middle of the living room like she was deciding whether to start yelling or burst into tears. "You humiliated us," she said, voice tight, but not yet screaming. I looked up and took a sip of water. I wasn't invited. Her jaw tensed and her fingers curled into the edge of her purse like she was squeezing a stress ball. "That's not how family handles things." "Good thing I'm not family then," I replied. Same tone, same volume. That line landed like a slap. She blinked twice like her brain was buffering. There it was. That pause. That split second where her face cracked and tried to rearrange itself into something resembling indignation. But it didn't quite make it. Bryce, she started pacing now, arms flailing a little. You canneled the entire thing. Do you know how many people had RSVP'd? We had speeches, music, lawn games. The kids were looking forward to that bounce house. Do you think this was just about you? I leaned back in the chair, folded my arms across my chest, and said nothing because, honestly, I was past the part where I needed to convince anyone of anything. It was supposed to be fun, she continued, voice rising. You made it personal. No, I said calmly. You made it personal when you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't invited. You didn't whisper it. You didn't pull me aside. You said it casually like I was some neighbor asking to borrow a lawn chair. Kendall rolled her eyes. Oh, for God's sake. Riley said it would be easier, less awkward. We just didn't want tension. You always make things tense around my family. I narrowed my eyes slightly. Do I make things tense, or do I just remind them that there are consequences to treating people like they're invisible? She stared at me, lips parted like she was about to respond. But she didn't because she knew what I said wasn't wrong. What frustrated her wasn't that I canceled the party. It was that I finally acted in a way she couldn't preempt, couldn't soften with charm, couldn't control. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Then again. She picked it up and grimaced. Probably Riley blowing up her messages, or her mother calling for the 5th time today to deliver another melodramatic lecture. She silenced it and looked back at me with a gaze that was now part desperation, part confusion. I just don't understand, she muttered. Why now? Why this? I stood and walked slowly toward the kitchen, grabbed the envelope I had pulled from the drawer earlier that morning and handed it to her. She looked at it confused, then opened it. Inside was a printed copy of the reservation confirmation for the barbecue venue. My name at the top, my credit card listed, the deposit breakdown, the cancellation confirmation underneath it all in bold. Her face turned pale. Not because she didn't know, but because seeing it on paper made it real. You were okay taking my money, I said softly, but not my presence. She sat down at the edge of the couch, suddenly quiet. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked like a little girl who had just been caught sneaking out. Except she wasn't a kid. She was a grown woman who had let her family dictate the limits of our relationship and quietly agreed to exclude me from something I paid for. Later that evening, her sister Riley tried to FaceTime me. I declined it without hesitation, then declined the second attempt. When the third one came, I blocked the number for the night. I had nothing left to explain. Eleanor left me a voice memo. 3 minutes of righteous indignation. She called me petty, immature, and clearly not ready for the gravity of family obligation. I played it once, then deleted it. She said I should be ashamed. But I wasn't. For the first time in a long time, I actually felt proud of myself. I sent her a single message in response, a screenshot of the receipt and nothing else. 10 minutes later, I saw that she read it. That was the last I heard from her that day. But what caught me off guard was the message that came a few hours after sunset. Tanner, Kendall's older brother, the one sibling who always seemed distant but not cruel. The one who rarely chimed in at family dinners and never ganged up with the others when I was the punchline. His message read, "Honestly, I don't blame you. That was messed up. You deserve better. That hit differently. It wasn't an apology on behalf of anyone. It wasn't even an offer to fix things. It was acknowledgement. And that meant more than any invitation could have. I typed out a response, paused, then deleted it. Instead, I just liked the message. That was enough. The rest of the night was quiet. Kindle retreated to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, lights dim, the sound of the ceiling fan humming in rhythm with my thoughts. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. Some fires don't need a spark. They start in silence, in slow dismissals, in subtle exclusions. And sometimes the only way to put them out is to walk away from the smoke. The silence settled into the house like dust, soft, steady, and impossible to ignore. Kindle didn't speak to me for 2 days. Not one word, no yelling, no apologies, no quiet attempts to mend what she knew was broken. She moved through the house like a ghost with unfinished business, slamming drawers, shutting doors too hard, thudding her heels across the floor with unnecessary force. Each sound was a performance, not of anger, but of injured pride. She didn't want to fix what happened. She wanted to punish me for not letting it go. But I didn't flinch, not once. I woke up early, made my coffee, sat at the kitchen island, answered work emails, took a few conference calls, and watched her come and go like she was auditioning for the role of betrayed wife. The truth, though, I wasn't angry anymore, just aware. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for her to acknowledge me. I was watching her show me who she really was. By day 3, the family launched into damage control. Kindle's mom, Eleanor, posted a smiling group photo from the barbecue that wasn't captioned with something like, "Sometimes the best memories come from the most unexpected moments." Hartleys always make it work. It was a desperate attempt to control the narrative. The photo was awkward too, posed, and Mr. Hartley looked visibly confused, probably wondering why they were posing in front of an empty pavilion with no guests and half-set tables. Kindle untagged me in the few photos that had my name attached like I was a phase she was trying to erase. Riley, unsurprisingly, went full scorched earth. She unfollowed me across every social media platform, sent a few indirect tweets about energy vampires and grown men who act like children. I didn't respond. I didn't even open the apps for the rest of the day because the thing was, I wasn't trying to win anything anymore. I had nothing to prove. I'd spent years making myself small enough to fit inside their version of family. This was the first time I had reclaimed space for myself, and the quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was restorative. That's when I realized something important. Kindle wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry I reacted in a way she couldn't control. She wasn't mourning a rupture in trust. She was grieving the loss of my compliance. That shook her more than anything. My silence wasn't passive. It was active resistance. The more I kept quiet, the more frantic they became. Riley sent a long text for thick paragraphs full of sarcasm disguised as concern. "I just don't understand how you could throw away everything over a little misunderstanding. You know how Mom gets. You should have handled this like an adult." I read it once, laughed softly, then archived it without replying. It wasn't worth the energy. Kindle began to circle. She'd hover in the same room with me, folding laundry she normally left untouched, wiping down clean counters, asking passive questions about things she already knew. "Did you see the mail today? Did your car key fob need new batteries?" I answered only what was necessary. Short, polite, detached. The more neutral I became, the more agitated she got. She wanted me to snap. She wanted a blow-up, something to justify her outrage. But I wouldn't give her that. I'd already given too much. By that Friday, The silence wasn't just between us. It was surrounding her family, too. No one from the Hartleys had reached out again, not even Mr. Hartley. Maybe they realized I wasn't budging. Maybe they were still trying to spin the story into something that made sense to them. Either way, I didn't care. I had my peace. And then the strange part happened. I started to like it. The quiet, the freedom. I went to bed without the weight of trying to decode Kendall's moods. I ate dinner without being interrupted by snide comments about my basic tastes or her family's endless string of humble brags. I sat on the balcony at night and actually tasted my coffee. Really tasted it for the first time in a long time. I didn't miss them. I didn't miss her. One night, while scrolling through old photos out of idle curiosity, I found an image from our first anniversary. We were at a small cabin in the mountains. Snow in the background, fire crackling beside us. Kendall in a red sweater laughing into a cup of cider. I remember taking that photo. I remember thinking, I finally found someone who sees me. Looking at it now, I realized something else. I wasn't in the photo. I was always behind the camera, always watching her shine, always holding the frame, but never inside it. It was a small thing, but it broke something loose inside me, a truth I hadn't wanted to admit. Maybe she never really saw me at all, and maybe I'd finally stopped trying to make her. By Saturday morning, the silence had transformed from a standoff into a sanctuary. I brewed coffee, took a long shower, then pulled out my laptop and started researching short-term apartments nearby. Not because I was making a decision just yet, but because I wanted to see what life could look like without the noise, the constant effort, the performance. Nothing makes people panic like the sound of your peace. And I was beginning to fall in love with mine. Tanner texted me on a Wednesday. "You free this Friday?" "I'll grill." No drama. It was the kind of message you don't expect from a brother-in-law who spent most of your marriage sitting at the edge of conversations, nodding politely, but saying little. Tanner wasn't like the rest of them, not fully. He kept his distance from the chaos, a silent observer rather than an enabler. I stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering, unsure what this was. A trap? A peace offering? A misstep, I typed back. Sure. What time? Friday evening came with a light breeze and the kind of sky that looked like it had been painted in layers. Soft orange, a hint of purple at the edges. I pulled up the Tanner's modest house on the edge of the neighborhood. Nothing showy, no trimmed hedges or glowing porch lanterns, just a driveway, 2 folding chairs in the yard, and the smell of meat already sizzling on the grill. Mara opened the door before I could knock. "Hey, Bryce," she said with a warm smile. "Come on in. Shoes off, please." Jun's in her noche face. Their daughter, June, 7 and small for her age, peeked around the corner with a remote control in one hand and a battered little race car in the other. "It's broken," she announced, as if it was the most urgent news of the evening. I crouched down. "Let me take a look." She handed it over like she was giving me sacred treasure. I sat on the floor with her for 10 minutes, unscrewing the battery casing, rewiring a loose connector, showing her how the antenna needed to be upright. She watched closely, eyes wide, like I was some kind of magician. "You fixed it," she shouted, racing it in uneven circles around the kitchen tile. Tanner chuckled from the backyard as I stepped outside. "Yes, you still got the magic touch," he said, handing me a cold beer. "Thanks for coming, man." Mira was a little nervous you'd say no. I shrugged, taking a sip. Didn't see a reason to. We settled into a rhythm, just the 4 of us. No tension, no side eyes, no careful dodging of verbal landmines. Mira played music from her phone, some acoustic playlist with just enough bass to tap your foot to. And June flitted between us with her car, offering updates like a pint-sized race commentator. Dinner was simple. Grilled chicken, corn on the cob, some kind of garlic bread had baked herself. I didn't realize how much I missed food made without the pressure of perfection. No platters arranged by color, no table settings dictated by Pinterest boards. Just warm food, warm people, and space to breathe. Mara passed me another drink halfway through the meal and said, "Tanner said, you're the only one in that family with a spine." I nearly laughed. That can't be true. I'm the guy who used to fix their gutters in the rain. Yeah, but you're also the guy who finally stopped letting them walk all over him, she said. That counts. Tanner nodded beside her, chewing quietly, then said, "It's about time someone held up a mirror." I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the stars as they blinked into view one by one. I hadn't done that in a long time. Just looked up, felt the night stretch over me like a blanket that didn't need straightening. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't sad. I didn't miss Kindle. I didn't miss the noise, the image management, the endless performance of being a good husband to a woman who graded me silently on a scale I never understood. I didn't miss her family. I didn't miss pretending. After dinner, we sat around a small fire pit in their yard. June had gone to bed, and Mira excused herself to start cleaning up. Tanner and I sat in comfortable silence until he spoke again. "They don't know how to deal with someone who doesn't beg for approval," he said. I looked over. "You mean me?" "I mean you now, the old you, maybe, but the guy who canceled the whole event because he got disrespected. That guy scares them." I chuckled. "Good." Tanner leaned forward, poking the fire with a stick. "I think they forgot you were a person. You just became part of the furniture. The guy who brings the toolbox. The guy who shows up." I nodded and disappears when they're done with him. He turned to me, voice quiet. "I see you, Bryce, for what it's worth." And that hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it was real. On the drive home, I passed the Hartley house. Lights glowing on the porch. Cars lined up along the curb. Another dinner party, no doubt. Kendall's voice probably carried through the walls, perfectly rehearsed. Riley laughing like she owned the air. Eleanor probably sitting at the head of the table, orchestrating it all. I didn't slow down. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't feel bitter, just free. It hit me then. Not every door left ajar needs to be walked through. Some are meant to stay closed. Some are meant to remind you that not all rooms are worth being in, even if the table looks pretty. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a man shut out of a family. I felt like someone who finally walked out. Kindle cracked on a Tuesday morning, a Tuesday. No warning, no build-up, just silence over coffee until suddenly there wasn't. "Can we talk?" she asked, not quite looking at me, her hands wrapped tight around her mug like it might keep her grounded. I set my spoon down beside the oatmeal I hadn't touched. "Sure." She sat across from me, postured too straight, face composed, but cracking at the corners. She looked like someone preparing for a deposition, not a conversation with her husband. That alone told me everything about where this was heading. I wanted to explain," she began, her tone soft, like I might break if she spoke too harshly. "The whole barbecue thing. It was Riley's idea, not mine. She thought maybe you'd make it awkward with Mom after that thing last Thanksgiving." I raised an eyebrow. The thing where I refused to fix the sink while everyone else was eating dessert. Kendall shifted in her seat, eyes flicking to the side. It wasn't about that. It was just they thought it might be easier, less tense. And you agreed. She hesitated. That half-second pause where guilt tries to make room for itself, but pride doesn't step aside. I didn't fight it. That landed with a dull thud between us. I waited, letting the silence stretch, watching her squirm. She hated quiet when it wasn't under her control. But I didn't mean for it to go like that, she added quickly. I didn't think you'd take it so personally. I leaned forward just slightly. That's the problem, Kendall. You didn't think about me at all. She blinked, clearly not expecting that tone from me. The old Bryce would have softened it, wrapped it in disclaimers and self-lame. But that man had left the room weeks ago. You didn't think about how it would feel to be left out. You didn't think about what it meant for me to find out like that. At a table I helped set up, holding a drink I paid for, standing next to people I thought I'd earned some kind of place with. I shook my head. You didn't think. You just let it happen. She rubbed her forehead, the guilt starting to fight its way through. I don't know what you want me to say, Bryce. I want you to tell me the truth, I said quietly. Did you think I didn't deserve to be there? Or did you just not care enough to make sure I was? Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. But no answer came. Instead, she offered what she always did when cornered, a compromise without substance. I can fix it, she said. You can come to the next one, dinner at Mom's. I'll make sure you're on the list. I stared at her, the weight of that sentence pinning me down. On the list. Like I was a contractor, not a husband. Like my presence was conditional, not assumed. Let me ask you something, I said slowly. If I show up next time, am I a guest or a ghost? She swallowed hard. I don't want to be tolerated, Kendall. I want to be chosen. Her expression flickered, the mask slipping for a brief moment. She looked down, then away, like she could outrun the truth in my words. But she couldn't. It was sitting in the room with us, bold and unashamed. I pushed my chair back and stood. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. I'm not asking to be treated like royalty, I continued. But I've spent years standing in corners, fixing things, paying for things, showing up without being seen. And if the best you can offer me now is a late invitation out of guilt, then you haven't heard a word I've said. Her voice came out smaller than I expected. So what? You're giving up? I shook my head. I already gave and gave and gave. What I'm doing now is walking away. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam doors. I just went into the guest room and closed the door behind me. She didn't follow. Not that night. Not the next morning. And maybe that was the clearest answer of all. That night, I lay on the spare bed, smaller, colder, but peaceful. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the moment at the barbecue party. The sound of her laugh when she told me I wasn't invited. The way her sisters smirked like I was some strange pet that wandered into the wrong room. That was the moment the thread snapped. There's a kind of sadness that settles in when you realize someone never really chose you. Only the version of you that served their image, their convenience, their narrative. I had been that version for too long. No more. I reached for my phone and typed out a message to myself. Something I'd been thinking but hadn't had the courage to say aloud. If they can laugh at your absence, they never deserved your presence. I read it once, then deleted it. I didn't need the words saved. I already knew them by heart. I told her the truth the next morning. Not with yelling, not with dramatics. Just with the calm precision that comes when you've already left a place in your mind long before your feet follow. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, clutching a coffee mug like it was armor. Her eyes were rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from sleep deprivation, but from the slow unraveling of control. For once, she wasn't dressed for the day. No lipstick, no blazer, just a faded college t-shirt and cotton shorts. Like she knew whatever was coming didn't deserve a costume. "I don't want to be tolerated," I said, stirring my coffee slowly. "I want to be chosen." She leaned against the frame, brow furrowed like she didn't quite understand. "So what? You're done?" I didn't flinch. I already was. You just didn't notice. The silence that followed wasn't sad. It was still hollow. She didn't argue, didn't beg. And that was what confirmed it for me. There was no fight because there was nothing left to fight for. I packed slowly. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be deliberate. I took what was mine, my tools, my books, the shirts she never liked. But I wore anyway. I left behind the expensive watch she got me for our 3rd anniversary. It had always felt more like a performance piece than a gift. I left the tie she bought to help you fit in at family functions, because now I knew that tie was never meant for me. It was for them. I didn't touch her things. I didn't write a long note, just a short one folded neatly and placed on the kitchen table under her favorite ceramic mug. You don't have to remember the people you used, but they remember you every time you laugh at them. That was all I had to say. Not out of bitterness, not out of spite, but because I knew she'd read it again and again, trying to decide if I meant it as a threat, a warning, or a goodbye. It was all three. The apartment I moved into was nothing fancy. A 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like fresh paint and something faintly lemony. There was no view, no fireplace, but the lock worked. The water pressure was solid, and the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a reset. I set up the essentials first. Coffee maker, lamp, the mattress I bought online that somehow expanded in slow motion across the floor. There was no welcome home, no soft echo of familiar footsteps behind me. And yet, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I wasn't lying to myself anymore. That weekend, I went hiking alone. For the first time in years, I didn't take the trail Kendall always picked, the one with flat loops and manicured paths for easy selfies. I picked something rugged, steeper, noisy with birds and wind, and the kind of honest effort that left your calves aching. At the top, I sat on a crooked bench and let the sun hit my face. I didn't check my phone. I didn't think about what they were doing. I didn't wonder if anyone noticed I was gone, because I finally did. I noticed myself again. I realized that I hadn't really seen myself in years. Not as I was. Just as a utility, a role, a husband shaped to fit someone else's design. I had bent so much to make Kendall comfortable, to make her family less awkward around me, that I'd folded myself into something almost unrecognizable. But now I was sore from the hike. My hair was damp with sweat. My legs had scratches from a missed branch. But I felt human, present, whole. That night, I fell asleep to the hum of the ceiling fan, and not the cold edge of a woman who only remembered I existed when I was useful. No fake apologies. No one hurling silence like a weapon. Just stillness. Kendall texted once that evening, just one line. "So this is it." I read it, then turned off my phone. No response was the answer. Some things don't deserve closure. Some things don't get a ribbon tied around them at the end. Sometimes the cleanest goodbye is simply walking away without turning back. The next morning, I opened the blinds in my new place and stood barefoot on the hardwood floor. Light poured across the room, touching the bare walls and unassembled furniture like a spotlight on a blank stage. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like a beginning. I didn't go looking for updates about the Hartleys. But when you spend years orbiting around a particular sun, some of its rays still manage to reach you even after you've stepped out of its warmth. It started with a coworker who had unknowingly followed Eleanor on Instagram. We were eating lunch in the break room when he said, "Didn't you used to be married into the Hartley family?" Man, their last event looked like a train wreck. I paused mid-bite. What event? He turned his phone around. A blurry photo of plastic folding chairs, mismatched tablecloths, and someone trying to light citronella candles with a broken lighter. Beneath the post, Eleanor had written a caption dripping artificial cheer. Sometimes plans fall through, but love shows up anyway. Hartley Family Barbecue. Take 2. There was no bounce house, no band, no carefully curated ambiance, just a dozen people in lawn chairs, looking confused. I recognized the park smaller than the original venue, one without a pavilion, just 2 overworked picnic tables and a patch of shade under a tired oak. Rumors began to swirl after that. Tanner told me first he'd stopped by the apartment with some leftover pizza and a 6-pack, unannounced, but welcome. We sat on the balcony, feet up on the railing, city sounds floating up from below. "They rescheduled it without your money," he said, cracking open a can. "No vendors, no equipment. They forgot to rent coolers. The food sat in the sun. One of the uncles got heat stroke." I raised an eyebrow, and the bounce house deflated halfway through. Some kid cried so hard his mom had to leave early. I didn't laugh, not out of restraint, but because it wasn't funny. It was pathetic. Sad even, not because they failed, but because they still didn't understand why they blamed it on. "You know," Tanner added after a pause, "not by name. But Riley said something about external drama in a video she posted, tried to make it sound like you ruined everything." I turned to him. "And what did the comments say?" He smirked. "Let's just say not everyone bought it. Couple of your old colleagues commented. One guy said Bryce was always the one holding things together, and the rest of the replies were not flattering." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I exhaled slowly and took a sip of my drink. "They missed your wallet," Tanner said after a beat. "Not your presence." I nodded. That stung in a way I didn't want to admit, because even though I was gone physically, emotionally. Finally, a small part of me had hoped someone there would reach out. Not to mend, but to acknowledge. Not to pull me back in, but to say you mattered. But what came instead were soft, muted pings of regret, disguised as convenience. Cassidy messaged me on Facebook, something vague about reconnecting over coffee. Kindle's cousin sent a text I hadn't seen in over a year. "Heard you've been doing well. We should catch up." Even Eleanor, in her own condescending tone, wrote, "Despite everything, I hope you're finding peace. We may not have seen eye to eye, but I wish you well." None of it was real. They weren't sorry. They were circling back to see if I still had something left to offer. If the door had been left ajar, but I'd shut it quietly, locked it, moved down the street, and planted a new one. I didn't respond to any of them. Not out of vengeance, just clarity. You don't owe people access to you simply because they finally notice the space you used to fill. Tanner picked at the edge of his beer label. I told Mira, if I ever start acting like Riley, she should smack me with a shoe. I chuckled. Just make sure it's one of those heavy-soled ones. He smiled. You know, Some of them think you did this for attention, that you wanted to make a scene. I didn't want a scene. I said, I wanted respect. Yeah, he nodded. And you didn't get it. No, but I found peace. That's better. We finished our drinks in silence. City lights flickered on below, like the world was slowly remembering itself. It didn't feel like I was rebuilding. It felt like I was unburdening. The next morning, I cleaned out the last of the moving boxes, tossing old receipts, expired warranties, bits of junk I'd clung to for no reason. I found an old Hartley family calendar, a thick cardstock print out from 3 Christmases ago. My name wasn't on it. Even then, I held it for a moment, then folded it twice and tossed it in the trash. That afternoon, I went for a walk downtown. The air was crisp, the sidewalks full of strangers with nothing to prove. I passed a coffee shop, paused, then walked inside. Sat by the window, ordered something I hadn't tried before, vanilla oat latte. I pulled out a book and started reading. And for the first time in years, I wasn't scanning the room for approval. I wasn't hoping to be seen. I was just there fully. Finally, 6 months later, my living room smelled like barbecue sauce, vanilla candles, and something unmistakably warm. Something that didn't come from a thermostat or a stovetop. It came from laughter, from voices overlapping as stories were told and retold. From a room that wasn't filled with people who shared blood, but people who shared respect. I was hosting my first birthday dinner in years. Not a grand affair, no ballroom, no curated playlist reviewed by Kendall's sister. Just 7 people. My closest friend from work, my neighbor from downstairs who once helped me carry a broken shelf up 3 flights of stairs, a guy from the auto shop who'd become an unlikely confidant, and Tanner and Mira, of course, with June who burst through the door holding a handmade card decorated in more glitter glue than paper. "For you," she shouted. "It has a dinosaur in a party hat." And it did. A crooked green T-Rex with sparkly teeth and a balloon tied to its tail. I bent down, taking it like it was priceless. This might be the best card I've ever gotten. She beamed and ran off to show someone her new toy. Mira leaned in and handed me a foil-covered pan, mac and cheese. The real kind with 3 cheeses and no judgment. The table wasn't set with matching plates. Some of the chairs didn't belong together. I had to borrow a few from the building manager who said, "You finally throwing a party, Langston?" With a wink. I didn't call it a party. I just said I was having dinner with good people. I grilled ribs, burned the first batch a little. No one cared. The drinks were cold. The music was an old soul playlist I liked. Tanner brought his famous grilled corn, and June insisted on setting the table fancy, which meant every napkin had a crayon drawing tucked under it. We sat, we ate, we laughed, and not once did I wonder if I belonged. Not once did I feel like a shadow at the edge of someone else's spotlight. At one point, Mira raised her glass and tapped it gently with her fork. The room quieted just enough. "To Bryce," she said, smiling in that effortless way she had. To the man who knew when to walk away, and the courage it took to finally say, "I deserve more." The table clinked with echoing cheers. My throat tightened, not because I was sad, but because I was full in a way I hadn't been in years. I looked around the table. No monogrammed napkins, no family crest carved into wood, no forced smiles, just real ones. A guy from my building leaned in, wiping barbecue sauce off his chin. "Man, you know how to host." I laughed. "That's just code for, you didn't overthink it." He grinned. "Exactly." Later that night, when most of the dishes were done and June had fallen asleep with her head on Myra's lap, Tanner joined me on the small balcony. He handed me a beer and looked out into the quiet night. "You did it," he said. "Did what?" "Built something new." I let the words sink in, not like a compliment, but like a confirmation. Something true, something earned. "I didn't know I needed to," I said, "until I left what I thought I had." "Yeah, well," he said, cracking open his bottle. "Sometimes the family you build makes more sense than the one you married into." We sat in silence, watching the streetlights flicker and cars roll by. I thought about the old days, dinners where I was dressed right, said all the right things, paid the bill, smiled through the condescension, and went home feeling emptier than when I arrived. I thought about Kendall's laugh when she told me I wasn't invited, the smirk on Riley's face, the way I stood there, invisible in plain sight. And now here I was, a second-floor apartment, folding chairs, glitter-glue dinosaurs, laughter spilling from a place that felt lived in, not performed. I wasn't trying to be part of their family anymore. I'd built one of my own, not out of defiance, not to prove a point, but because peace is the kind of thing that doesn't shout, it hums. It moves through spaces you didn't know needed filling, and it stays. When the last guest left and the apartment fell into the hush of post-celebration, I turned off the lights, sat at the table, and looked at the empty plates, the crumpled napkins, the sticky fingerprints on the side of a glass. Evidence not of a party, but of presence. This time, I wasn't standing in the shadows. I was at the head of the table,